shaping diplomacy, shaping geopolitics, shaping global governance. So clearly there is a silo. So the communities, and this is a simplification, so we're not just talking about scientists and diplomats literally, but the two worlds are siloed educationally and professionally. And so when we come to the global challenge and we come to the negotiation table, we find that we don't share this common language. We're not prepared to understand each other and to work together towards a common approach. And this is not just about knowledge, it's also about culture, it's about intercultural understanding. And this is why I really love that this theme is emphasized here. And also the question of who is included, right? And yesterday we had a wonderful session with Panama that really showcased the challenges and what happens when not all the groups that are stakeholders are included in the decisions and in the discussions. And so how do we overcome those silos? So we'll start with higher education, right? Universities. So we're going to hear about how universities are transforming themselves in order to prepare people, students, future professionals to navigate and cross those bridges. We also have now a lot of diplomatic academies and foreign ministries who are introducing science and science diplomacy into their core diplomatic curriculum. So what type of materials, resources, now going into the practical aspects, those very different communities or those different settings are needed. And then it comes to our work here. So the work of InsSciDE, the work of the Alliance, all of the materials, all of the outputs, all of the resources that we use, how best to put them to use to serve the needs of those communities of learning and practice of science diplomacy. And so, as we said, today we're going to have a symposium, and we're going to see from the two pilot, well, not pilot already, so the Warsaw Summer School is already consolidated, right? So the InsSciDE Warsaw Summer School, who has been really innovative in terms of the methodologies for training, and of course, with the challenges of COVID, having to build this intercultural, bake in very strong networking, intercultural understanding, trust building online is not easy. And then, so with Claire, we're going to hear from the teachers and the students from the summer school. And then with Maria, we're going to hear from the ELISA project and the pilot seminar that she ran also with Alberto and Sofia and others. And so this is hopefully going to shed light on what types of contents, methodologies, pedagogies, instruments for teaching and learning do we need, so we can prepare our future generations and current generations, not just the futures, to navigate this interface. So with that, I will start with Claire. We have 2 blocks of 30 minutes each, and then we're going to have an open discussion between the teachers, learners, and all of you in the audience. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Marga. Could you give me my telephone, which is behind your, because I'll be, thank you very much. And I shall also try to communicate with Olga Dubrovina, who is in the train now going back to Padova, Padova University. I'm just going to tell her, Olga, if you hear us, we are starting the InsSciDE block now. And so I encourage you to sign into Zoom whenever you can. Thanks. So, good morning. Yes, I'm Claire Mays. I'm Executive Director of the InsSciDE project. And today I want to talk on behalf of Team Warsaw, which is a great multi-interdisciplinary team within InsSciDE who successfully organized 2 summer schools, the Warsaw Science Diplomacy School in June 2020 and in June 2021. And of course, this became the Warsaw Science Diplomacy School online, virtual. And it happened despite ourselves, of course, despite everyone's expectations. And we really have to thank our big partners, European Academy of Diplomacy, EAD, who had already adapted to this online switch for very large educational events. And we were able to benefit from their experience. So we had to set out in our summer school and also in this virtual format to create an educational space to talk about history of science diplomacy, and how that can potentially be transformed into policy and strategies for the future. And here's just a picture of our second one, which took place this year in June, in which we were thinking that the theme could be from Wissenschaft to statecraft. So our approach is really, once again, to try to benefit from the knowledge and the transmission powers of our inside case study authors, who are historians of science and technology and STS scholars, and also political scientists. Try to bring that into case-based learning. All of this was done, of course, with and for these 28 plus 24 students, people from across the world, you'll see, and some of them at the beginning of their professional or academic career, others really quite advanced. And this mixture of experience and solidity in their own practice was, of course, also a feature of this context. Our ambition, the instructional option that we chose very strongly, was one of teamwork, small group work, really relying on the students to listen and elaborate together with the collaboration of their knowledgeable instructors. This is just a look at the spread that we had and the type of information also that we gave to the students, of course, to start out with, where they were from, who they were representing, either by their nationality or their country of reference. We had 10 EU member states, 6 continents, 27 countries total amongst the first 28. Here we see the initial training and the present professional fields of the class of 2020. We see also the gender balance, which was quite tipped toward women participants. And we had a small number in green at the bottom of these blocks, a small number of people whose initial training was diplomacy or international relations, in blue, social sciences, humanities, and in gold, STEM and health training. And you see, quite interestingly, that there is a switch, going from original disciplinary training to profession. First 2 blocks, that's initial training. Second 2 bar blocks are the present fields. For the 2021 edition, we once again had a good spread. Things are concentrated in Europe because, after all, we are a European project inventing a shared science diplomacy for Europe. But we realize, of course, that Europe doesn't just do diplomacy on itself. Of course, there has to be a dialogue. And we were able to get some representation and some dynamic of this intercommunication in our groups. Here is the cover of the participants booklet that was distributed beforehand to all of our participants, our students, and there are their flags of representation. And here inside that book, they discovered which case study team they were attributed to. Of course, they'd done their applications before. We had a very competitive process, more than 120 applications, which were quite substantial applications with 2 essays and choice of ranking of the case study teams that each one would like to be in. And as I say, we accepted 28 for the first school, 24 to make a smaller, more, shall we say, portable group for the second edition. And I show you here also the faces of our instructors, who are just 8 amongst the 24 case study authors that we have in InsSciDE. And so you see that there's quite a range. In red each time you have the case study title, Natural Resources as Public Goods for Global Health, Biodiversity Negotiations. That was Team Leroux under the guidance of Muriel Leroux. We have at the bottom in that left-hand side, for example, the Team Robinson UN Convention on the Law of the Sea, co-production of science and diplomacy. And well, if you see all of these titles, you see that it represents the great range of cases within InsSciDE. And our challenge was to go both in depth within these teams on these subjects and to have the possibility of cross-cutting talk between the students and instructors, and also try to hook this history endeavor up with a forward-looking, policy-centered or strategy-centered endeavor. You see also the picture of Olga Dubrovina, whom I hope will be online, and I'll count on Daniela in the back of the room to let us know if she does come online. It would be after 9:35. We will also call on student witnesses today. These are three. Each within the participant booklet, each one had a big paragraph, and I've clipped these here just so that you see that we represented their countries in their title. This is just our backstage team, and you can see that we were having a lot of fun over the course of an entire week of really paying attention and doing a lot of manipulation. This is the master schedule, just to give you an example of how much there was. And here is Zane Shime's certificate of completion, which notes that the program comprised 30 years of intensive learning with 11 hours of lectures, 10 hours of teamwork in breakout groups, 6 hours of debate and discussion, and 3 major deliverables. These students working online, some of them in very different time zones, meeting each other for the first time this way, and encountering many times for the first time a history of science and technology outlook. They had to do 3 major deliverables, prepare them in a very short time, and present them also to outside juries who were invited. There was a lot of instructional design. When it says D 1.7, that means deliverable 1.7 of the InsSciDE project. This was a confidential deliverable, but we're going to look into making our instructor's logbook public within this, I think, 60-slide PowerPoint manual. We went over all of the types of modules, the pre-recorded ones, live, guided or independent subgroups, and also the fun modules to, keep it lively and keep us moving and awake. And here's an example of one of our popular lectures, which you can find online, and it was given by Rasmus Bertelsen, who is our academic director. And here's within that PowerPoint, which was distributed to all the participants, this, sort of instructional guide. Here's the format in which we presented each module of each day. So an example at the top here of our opening session, which was open to the public, partly because we did have health researchers, history of science, or STS health, and we wanted to open it up because of the COVID experience. And for example, Céline Payette from CNRS in Paris, her case study is dealing with the plague in Oporto, 1899-1900, a matter of global epidemic diplomacy. It's really, that is the event, the long event, which is at the source of our international sanitary regulation and cooperation. And then on day 5, last day of the week, we have a discussion, the flipped learning evaluation, when we asked the students to evaluate what they had done. We could say that, we already had an evaluation with all of these tweets that have been going on all week. And of course, I love the one at the top, Marga Agual. We have modestly covered it up a little bit, but she said, "This is truly amazing. WSDS 2020 managed to recreate online the in-person elements of a successful science diplomacy course. Relationships, trust building, networking, experiential learning, et cetera, case-based learning." Okay, we're proud. And we were a real team, everybody here. Yeah, these are the students tweeting also, and it was a team. It was great. We had both written evaluations. Each day at the end of the day, they had to fill out a Google form questionnaire. And then we also had this hour-and-a-half module of new mixed subgroups, not the case study teams, but new mixed subgroups elaborating together what they had, the message that they wanted to give back to the instructors and the designers. And we had both, the items on which there was room for improvement and what they considered to be the high value aspects. And we were very demanding of our students. Here's a slide, what we want at the end of the school. We want your evaluations. Everybody had to fill every single questionnaire, daily questionnaire before the diplomas would be sent out. We needed all of the deliverable PowerPoints, et cetera. And we want your collective intelligence and your will to network and form bonds. And part of what we've done to help form bonds, and this is from the second edition, we really took the advice of our evaluators, student evaluators, to do as much as we could to make the second remote event as personal as possible. And we also had these pub nights with a proximity platform, for example. This is where you can read all about it. We did a very, very substantial evaluation report, which I think Marga has read and appreciated. And you can go to InsciDE. You can go to results in the top menu and look through the results and find this evaluation report page. You can also find publications under results, and notably you'll find the publication that we did jointly with S4D4C on how we designed our various educational offerings and what was in there. I'd like to call on witnesses now. I'd like to call on Sam Robinson, if you don't mind coming up. And we hope that we'll have Olga online, and we hope that we have those three witnesses, Nuseba, Suryash, and Zane. Thanks. Stand up.
Hi everyone. I don't know what you want me to say, but I will say this. I'll say a few things. I didn't go into the summer school thinking that I was a teacher. I went into the summer school thinking that I was also a student who was going to be getting to speak first. And the first thing we decided to do with my team was change the name. And we decided to call ourselves Team Oceans. And after I'd spoken, I realized the best thing I could do was shut up. And I just listened, and I learned as much as I think I taught them. And since the summer school, Zane, who's going to speak in a minute, has done book reviews for me. And Andre Poljak, who was in my session, who's a diplomat who's currently doing a PhD at the UN University in Sweden. We talk all the time. And if he needs me, he reaches out. If I need him, I reach out. And so this morning there's been an exchange of tweets with people around the world asking for people to collaborate on an article about decolonializing ocean science diplomacy. And Andre's tagged me in, and I would, without the summer school, never have got a seat at that table. And I'm hoping in the future with that team of people to put research grant project proposals together, because they know more than I do about many more things than I could ever imagine that I would learn about.
Daniela, do we have our student witnesses online? Super, can we transition to them? You can stay here, Sam. I'm going to crawl under your chair to get my mask. I'll mention while we're waiting that the students also grouped up to write student takes, articles that have been published on our website, which will also be under the Results Warsaw Science Diplomacy School section on the website. And you can see for 2020 an analysis of what they did, what they learned, what they concluded. And for 2021, you can see some very interesting articles about the policy proposals that were made by each team in a strategic outlook after having studied, for example, the history of ITER, the fusion endeavor, nuclear fusion endeavor, and plenty of other aspects. How are we doing, Daniela? Okay. Super. Welcome, welcome, friends. Thank you so much for witnessing with us today. Who'd like to go first? Shall we have Zane, who's our faithful 2020 participant? Go ahead, Zane.
Thank you. I'll deliver 3 points then. Firstly, my major gain from the school was a broadened awareness about the diversity of topics incorporated in the science diplomacy discussions and people who specialize in each of the themes. Both the InsSciDE Environmental Diplomacy Workshop and the Warsaw School helped me to map the relevant authors, and several of them are referenced in my EU diplomacy paper titled European Union Science Diplomacy in the Southern Neighborhood, Mapping the Field and Plurality of Resilience Builders, published by the College of Europe. Secondly, I learned a lot, not solely from the instructors and teaching researchers, especially Muriel Leroux, who guided the biodiversity team. I learned it also from my fellow participants who have diverse academic and professional backgrounds. And I think that this rich composition of expertise assembled by the school significantly contributed to its success. And last but not least, due to the fact that currently I focus on the practice theory, I think it is worth noting that the way science diplomacy is studied is the way science diplomacy is practiced. Thus, collaborative learning encompasses quite a considerable proportion of the overall practice of science diplomacy. Thank you. That would be it from my side.
Thank you so much, Sunny. Synthetic, enthusiastic, communicative. That's a typical Warsaw Science Diplomacy student with InsSciDE. Thank you. May I call on Suryash from a 2021 course?
Yes, thank you very much, Claire. I would echo Zane in highlighting all those points again. It was a great learning experience and a great networking opportunity as well. So many of the instructors and also the other participants of the school, like many of them, I'm actually collaborating on other things. So great learning things, a great way to be aware about all different things that are going on under the broad umbrella term of science diplomacy. Also the case studies, like bringing out the real world perspectives through case studies, how it is actually practiced. That was really great. And we also wrote an article on it, on the case study that we were assigned to. Another important aspect I would mention is the lecture about the risk, safety, and security, which I believe I have attended many other schools and conferences on science diplomacy, but that aspects often go missing. So that was another good highlight for me, learning that. And actually, I carried forward some of the learnings that I got from that lecture and also contributed to a youth declaration on biosecurity. That is something I'm working on with UN Office of Disarmament Affairs. So great learning that way. Also, in terms of this online learning experience, often like there is in general a fatigue with online lectures and online learning, but with Warsaw School in general, there were really nice breaks, timely breaks, and a lot of fun activities and online interaction, which is something I really appreciated as a part of the school. So overall, great learning. Small teams, the small groups and the teamwork and the group discussions that we had were also amazing. I have bonded really well with most of my teammates, and it was a great experience. So thank you very much again for organizing. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
Thank you indeed, Suresh. Before we go to Nuseba, yes, I will mention that we did have some rather impressive professionals in our group, and we're very proud that this special week in a month of June, in each case, has contributed, we believe, to your professional exercise, and we've seen also that there have been bonds and networks created, as Sam Robinson mentioned, and I think that you can go online and read about indeed the professional connections that have been made between students, which have really opened new horizons. I'd like to call on Nuseba. Nuseba might have been with us here today in Erlangen because I believe that you're an FAU student, but please give us your feedback.
So hey everyone, yeah, I would have been there, but I'm in Mauritius at the moment, which isn't so bad actually. I can only repeat what other people have said. It was such a great experience, such a great learning experience, and especially for me because I'm a paleontologist. We rarely, engage with like things beyond our field, and I came into this summer school not knowing what science diplomacy was. I had only heard about it actually from one of the organizers of the conference, and I came out with so much more than just learning what science diplomacy was. I met so many people, which I really thought would not have been possible in a virtual environment. I was actually dreading it before starting because I was like, a week online, that was going to be really hard. But I really enjoyed discussing with all the people with whom I was teamed with, who were really thinking of already tackling issues that I deal with in my own field. And now we have come together to think about these issues, and we're working together, each bringing our own expertise and views to tackle issues that we previously had been doing individually. I really think it's so important to be able to connect with people outside your own field, to be able to think more broadly about the impact that your science can have. I mean, I come from a very small field, and this is really what the summer school has allowed me to do. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you. Thank you, Nuseba. And I remember also, sometimes it was a bit challenging for the instructors. We're sort of used to, having a tranquil classroom, maybe not in Sam's course, but in my very small experience of teaching, even if students are quite different, usually when you're sort of in a classroom together, people are quite respectful and taking the law that's handed down and so forth. And that was really not the case for our Warsaw Science Diplomacy groups. It was really a delight to see the great individualities and the different cultural outlooks, but especially the great will to indeed create this in the collective intelligence. So thanks for your participation. Daniela, have we been able to include Olga in our Zoom?
I'm here. I don't know if you hear me or if you see me.
Yes, welcome, Olga. It's perfect.
Thank you.
Another instructor, go ahead.
I start to speak.
Yes, please, go ahead, Olga. Give us your feedback.
Okay. I wanted to speak in terms of my negative and my positive experience, but I think it's better to speak about, it was Leonardo's suggestion to speak about challenges. So for me, it was a real challenge to teach it's train. It's not me.
Yes, it's fine. Thank you.
To speak with people that I don't know, that come from different cultures, different countries, different continents, and speak about my topic, about my research. It was like my very private thing, and so I want to speak about 3 challenges that I had to face during this experience. The first was the fact that there were from very different backgrounds, cultural backgrounds. And for historian, and I'm historian, it's very important to take it in account and not to offend people with any, I don't know, false concept or interpretation. And I had this, I don't think it was my mistake. It just was a very interesting thing that I was thinking in one way about an episode, and now I'm speaking about Soviet-French relationship during the Cold War. And I had a French member of group, French student, and she thought in a very different way. So when I started my lecture, I didn't even think about the fact that my episode could be interpreted in these different ways. So I think it was my fault. It was very interesting to hear how other person from other culture can see differently the same things. Another thing that I want to highlight was about the research. So I had to explain in a few hours all my research, and it wasn't difficult. The difficulty was the lack, I think, of background, historical background of my students. So they didn't know anything about Soviet Union, about how it worked in Soviet Union, about how it was organized, the not only the space program, but how it's the history of Soviet Union. They didn't know anything about them. That people whom I was speaking about, they didn't know them. And so I had to, I think it was the difficulty to explain in few words, very difficult concept, very difficult historical episode. And it was a real challenge. Sometimes they ask questions, sometimes not. And well, it was a difficulty of how to say the epidemic situation, that it was difficult to establish a personal relationship. And the last challenge that I faced, I think it was to explain for the future diplomats, because I think that they aspire to be science diplomats. It was difficult to explain the importance of the history. So for example, when I teach to students in Italy, the problem is that a lot of students, they don't like history. They hate history. And they don't understand why they have to study history. And the first lessons that it's always about how important to know your past and in order to understand your present. It's always the same common things. And even in this context, I had to face the same problem. These were very interesting people, very interesting students from very different science fields, but they were scientists. They weren't humanists like me, and they didn't understand why I was talking about Soviet Union, why it's important to understand the contemporary Russia. So it was my aim to help them understand why I was talking about 60s, 70s, 80s, and why it was important for if they want to work with the contemporary Russia, with contemporary Russian ruling class, why it was important to understand how it worked during the Cold War. I don't know if I succeeded. I hope, but it was my aim. I don't know. I finished my presentation. It was my 3 doubts, 3 challenges, and I think that it's this thing. As historians, I think that we have to take in consideration even in the future if we want to teach history to diplomats who are working now. And I just want to say the last thing, because I left yesterday very fast and I didn't realize that I'm leaving this morning. I wanted to thank the organizers for the conference, that I appreciated a lot how they were precise and punctual and friendly. So I thank personally Maria Rinteze, Gabriela Radulescu for all things that they did for us. Thank you. I don't see them. I hope they are here in the whole conference.
Yes,
okay.
They're here and appreciate. Thank you so much, Olga. Thank you, Thanks to all of you who are on the screen. I'm going to turn it right back over to Marga now to take this seance, this session forward as she sees fit. Thanks once again for going above and beyond and for making this team sustainable. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you very much all for this fantastic testimonials. A special hello to Zane. She was also a participant in our AAA Science Diplomacy course many years ago. So I take just very quickly 3 lessons from what we've heard just now. The value of the course is not just for the students, but for the instructors. So you can see how the structures feel challenged because they are, especially the academics, to a more monolithic or homogeneous audience in their students in many cases. And so now they have to be in a course that everything from environment to health to agriculture to oceans, diplomacy is being, it's coalescing together. So this is really, I think, a learning experience as well for the instructors. And also the instructors create this network. And I've seen a lot of networks of experts in science diplomacy actually be born in training. So I'm thinking about Simone and when we were in Brazil, in Sao Paulo with the InsSciDE summer school, so InsSciDE, sorry. The same name is being, the same acronym is being taken up. So there are, I think, there's also a huge value for the experts to bring forward the community of experts and if you will, science diplomacy training or instructors. Also the component of moving away from the one-way training, meaning that the instructions learn as much as the student. So it's a much more peer learning and a more horizontal approach. Also the importance of experiential learning. So learning through case studies, flipped approaches, experiential simulations, all of that, extremely important, especially because we're trying to put people in the other role, the shoes of the other role that they are not familiar with, like, why do we need to learn history or how a diplomat needs to think in order to conduct their job. The best way is to put yourself into the other person's role as the fastest way to understand and empathize with that person and role. And finally, something that Sam and I talked about yesterday, which is now, I'm going to leave it open, and with Maria, we can talk about it later, is the question of gender and science diplomacy. So we had a lot of anecdotal evidence before. So I've done, I've seen thousands of people going through trainings already in the last 8 years. And it's really, I think, telling that your statistics, Claire, that you showed on the female-male ratio of participants with regards to their original training and then their professional placement. So many more women are interested in science diplomacy education and training by the applications that we see and the numbers of the participation of women in these types of trainings. And then we see that kind of correlates with the STEM leaky pipeline. So Sam made an observation about how women are leaving after their PhDs in the hard sciences mostly and going into policy, diplomacy, communication, science adjacent fields, which are not necessarily diplomacy focused. And this is something that Tim talks about all the time, that this is how science diplomacy is being distorted and conflated with a kind of a mixed bag of everything that's not academia. And this could be a problem, depending on how you look, right? And also the stereotyping of women are more collaborative, therefore they are better suited for policy roles and not for nuclear physics, for example. So I would like to just invite Sam to have one comment on that, and then we'll transition to the ELISAC team.
Thanks for not warning me about this.
I did last night.
Did you? Okay. I think this comes to a wider thing for in academia, which is the idea that there's a misogyny in saying that women scientists have the soft skills required for diplomacy, and therefore this is a good thing. Because there comes from a second level of misogyny in the idea that if you fail to become a lab scientist when you're trained as a PhD scientist, you're some kind of failure. And we need to just accept that PhDs are pathways to many possible careers. And just because you don't end up as a lab bench scientist, that might not be the best place for you to change the world. And I just think that we need to kill the idea that it's failure. And we also need to stamp very hard on the misogynistic attitude that women have some gendered ability to do this, because they're doing it because they're fantastic scientists.
Thank you very much, Claire, Sam, and all of our student witnesses. And I will call now Maria and Alberto and Sofia for the second part of the ELISA training. Do we have enough chairs and microphones, or we need to hand over the microphones? Okay, so we can have two and yeah.
Let me go.
Okay. Wonderful. Yes. Yeah, exactly. So welcome to the second part. So we're going to learn about ELISA, what is ELISA, and what it's all about. So Maria, please introduce us to this project, and then we'll hear from the project team. So thank you.
Thank you. Actually, it's a pity that we don't have enough chairs, because it's not an ELISA only project, it's an InsSciDE project and an FAU project. So Rasmus and Alexandros were all involved in this project. So maybe at some time we shift and the others can also come up. So good morning from my part as well. Let me give you very briefly the history behind this project, because it's very interesting and it connects with what we've heard until now from InsSciDE experience. And I'm really thankful to this first part of today's session, because although we are all insiders, I didn't have a full picture of how successful the summer schools have been until now. And as Claire said this morning, it's not an experiment anymore. It's a very nice and well-established course that I hope that we will be able to offer in the future as well. Our example is totally different, is absolutely an experiment. I started this semester. As I said, I just accepted this position at the FAU, and I thought, since I have this experience in science diplomacy, this is my research focus, this is my teaching focus, I should bring science diplomacy within academia. That was the first idea I had. So I offered the course. Right now, I belong to the humanities and social sciences faculty, and especially to the Institute of Sociology. So I offered the course to sociologists. And it was a course totally different from what we heard this morning. It was a more academic course focusing on the literature, the work that the insiders have already produced, the important work from John Krieg, for example, that we had the first night, all the academic papers that we have in mind when we start thinking about science diplomacy. How many students did I get? 2. So I thought, what am I going to do to introduce such a course, such a deep course with a lot of reading, with only 2 students from the FAU plus my own ERC students? This is stupid. So what's the next step? I was fortunate to be at the FAU. FAU is a partner of ELISA, and we are going to hear what ELISA is. And I thought I also brought my memories and my experience of being at a technical university until now and teaching at a technical university. And I thought, I'm stupid. The sociologist and the kind of work that I had in mind to offer, let's say, is not what scientists are interested in. So the scientists are interested in the practical part of science diplomacy and not the academic part. And I'll talk about these 2 audiences in a minute. So when I opened the course to ELISA, I called Sofia. I said, in 4 days, the course starts. I have 2 students. Can you do something? In 4 days, we got 133 applications when we put the course into the ELISA network. Amazing. I thought, this is amazing. I cannot handle 133 students. So we ended up, although we had the help, of course, of Rasmus and Alexandros, we ended up accepting something like 20 students, the master students and the PhD students, and we had the course. Some of the students are here today. Unfortunately, because of the COVID regulations, the new ones, some of them didn't make it, but the ELISA network supported the ELISA students to join us here today. One final word about the challenges to the academics. I think some brought this a minute before, and also the two audiences that we have. I realized through this experiment that we have two major audiences. The one is the academic community, and the next is the practitioners. If we agree in something, when we speak about science diplomacy and we discuss the definition of science diplomacy, I think the only thing that we can all agree is that we have these two different parts of science diplomacy, the more theoretical one and the more practical one. We don't have the generation of academics, the science diplomacy trained academics that can teach right now what science diplomacy is. This is why Sam had the problems that he explained this morning. This is why all of us have the problem to teach our next generation of students, because we don't have this whole spectrum education to do so. So one of our aims is to produce and prepare this next generation. When I started studying science and technology studies 20 years ago in the US, I was fortunate to have as my mentor, my professor, Gary Downey, a key figure in STS. He used to tell us at that point, none of us is STS. You are the next generation of STS scholars. So I feel the same today. None of us is science diplomacy scholars. The next generation are the scholars that are going to be able to handle in the future something like this. However, we have our disciplinary experience, all of us. And at this point, I think the only way we can do this is to work all together and provide this disciplinary experience to the students that they want to practice science diplomacy. It's not by chance that all of the students that registered for our course, the 133, and we had to go through their CVs, come from the sciences. They come, as I said, from the ELISA network, and they are engineers, and they are the ones that need this kind of education at this point. And because we have very short time and limited time, I think it's very important to hear from the ELISA group what ELISA is, what they can offer, what the next steps might be. So, you have.
Thank you so much, Maria. So you can, I think, self-organize. Who would you like to start?
Okay.
Okay, Alberto, go ahead.
Okay, thank you very much. I really apologize for not being able to join this meeting until late in the evening yesterday. I'm very sorry because personally, I'm not too familiar with the topics of, oh yes, thank you. I'm not too familiar with this area of knowledge, this needed area of knowledge, and this important area for education for engineers. But in fact, I became aware of this because one initiative that came out of our ELISA Alliance, a community, decided to focus on this area. I am an engineer. I studied in the late 80s. And if you can imagine how my training was, I guess you can do it. You've got a problem, find the best technical and economic solution, and you're done with it. You move on to the next project. Sophia is much younger than I am. She's also an engineer. She will share with us her experience. Mine is limited to that. And the fact is that our programs at the Universidad Politécnica de Madrid, Technical University of Madrid, even though students get a knowledge of the context they will work on, they have to evaluate some safety regulation, some social aspects of the problem they will dealing with. But they will find the technology, the technical solution, just by looking at the books, the companies, and they will prepare, evaluate the solution, present it, evaluate the parameters, the solution, and they're done with it, most of it. It is my understanding that most engineers in the world are trained as such. And I can say this because I'm in charge of evaluating our programs at the Universidad Politécnica de Madrid with international organizations, with international accreditation agencies, both from the US and from Europe and from Spain. And the accreditation templates, the procedures, they hardly look beyond what is engineering training and education. And this is the current standards for, whoops, that's, I truly apologize for this. It wasn't prepared, it wasn't made up. So, yes, this is what the accreditation agencies are expecting technical universities to provide a training for our students. So what ELISA wants to do, what is the main goal? First of all, it's a university alliance formed by 9 institutions around Europe. You can see them here. FAU is one of them. Polytechnica is another one. And you can see 2 from Italy, 2 from France, 1 from Hungary, 1 from Romania, and 1 from Turkey. Our alliance has a given size, a regular size for a university alliance. Most of them are this size, 180,000 students, 16,000 faculty, 11,000 staff. And our mission is to transform higher education into the sea of future in which society, we can master social global challenges with the mass and sustainable enabled by engineering. So this is the main goal. And we want to really to go beyond, much more beyond the traditional engineering education, which, by the way, we are not doing too bad because our engineers are successful, have successful careers, but perhaps there is an understanding that this is not enough. So we want to train and educate a new generation of European engineers. And the word in European is very important because our training is a values-driven training. It's the idea for European citizens with European values. And this has to be added to the notion of what an engineer is. To create an interdisciplinary, multicultural, industry-connected, so socially sensitive, problem and challenge-based learning environment. The environment is a critical word. The environment in which engineers will be trained will have to contain all these features, all these aspects. And this, in our understanding, is one unique feature of our alliance, the idea of communities. And so far, we've been exposed to other university alliances approaches, and we have very much in common with all of them, but we don't see this idea of communities in all of them. This is unique in ELISA. So we've created communities in which students, together with faculty, staff, stakeholders, collaborate and have a shared vision and mission. And students will be able, they will be free to choose the community they like the most, the community they are attracted to, and they will be able to have an experience together with other university students of the universities, faculty from the other universities, focusing on a topic, on a problem that has been identified completely freely, democratically by a group of professors that they believe it's relevant to pursue, it's relevant to get deeper, and it's relevant to approach. And the students will be able to choose from dozens of communities, and they will be able to get a credential, they will be able to do their end of degree project, their master thesis, share, take courses, participate in projects, and we hope to have communities that are relevant for the areas of work and training that we're dealing with. So the goal also is to allow students to combine their academic training outcomes, learning outcomes, and exposure, commitment, and ability to address societal challenges in real world problems. So why the European engineer of the future must be humanistic, values-driven? Technologies aren't neutral. Engineering solutions are not neutral too. They are really burdened with options, with political choices, with impacts to society, with impacts to different social groups. Human data, you know, are abundant and ubiquitous for the good of humankind. Yesterday, I left my iPad in the plane and I went to change in Frankfurt terminal. I got a phone call from the airplane telling me that they retrieved my iPad, that this was in the baggage claim area of the airport. I returned, I got in the bus, returned to Terminal 1 and recuperate my iPad. So data, this data, you're really disturbed when you have to add so much data for anything, just boarding a plane or getting a boarding car. But you know, it provided me a wonderful service, and I was relieved because there's, you know, it's really a nuisance to lose your materials. But it could be deadly in the wrong hands and used unethically. And engineers are used to process data, to make evaluations, all sciences, but engineers are trained to do a lot of work with data. And it's very important that they really take into account what the implications of using data, especially if it's personal data, in their work. STEM students, STEM education is really poor if it goes deprived of human values, social science, history, diplomacy. I told you at the beginning that my training didn't have any of that, anything at all. And perhaps you developed a sense of this as you work, as you develop your career. But it was very much driven by your own interests, nothing related to education, formal training in these areas. And we believe, in ELISA degree, we believe that STEM education must have this in a proper dimensions, in a proper intensity. Otherwise, our engineers will not be ready to face the challenge worlds and to be what we want, European engineers. So our program should instill in students a critical attitude and much broader perspective. Their training must go beyond what they learn, which is hard, which is challenging for all of them, but we must make sure that that education goes beyond the traditional training of engineers. So, in short, a competent engineer is one that cooperates rather than competes, that influences others and has an independent ideology, an independent view of the world, that understands the risks and the social context in which he or she works and understands the power of technology and uses it for the common good. See, so this is what we want to achieve in ELISA. And we know it's a challenge, but ELISA really wants to live up to this challenge and offer this new generation of engineers the education I'll try to explain to you this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alberto. I have a lot of comments, but I'll just keep them until for the end, so Sophia can share with us as well.
If it's good. Thank you a lot, Alberto. Alberto has given a wide perspective of ELISA, so I will not come again on its comment, but I think what's really important is that, and I'm really happy to be here, and thank you, Maria, for the invitation, that we are at a turning point, and we have the space and the opportunity to do something. So it was really eye-opening to be here among your community of insiders and with the InsSciDE projects. We now really have the space to put concrete proposals to this. So we have two things to do. We are developing the model of the new engineer of the future. First opportunity to define new models. What do we want to put in this? What the role of science diplomacy, how to help these engineers, the idea that Alberto bring, but also with much less barriers and much more short-term, the communities. We want to build these spaces in which we want to break the gap between knowledge, science, research, innovation, and society. And we have really new opportunities to work towards mission-driven problems with the students and also with the academics, and bringing the idea of today's testimony, and the teacher learn as much as the student. So the paradigm is changing, and we want to put forward these opportunities in what we call these platforms of collaboration that are the communities. So we want to help academics to prepare to do this new paradigm, and students so by not just pulling more layers of knowledge, but working with real problems, real challenges with external stakeholders, and help the students combine these layers of challenges and create the interface. That's why I thought this experience in science diplomacy in this seminar was so interesting, because I think there are a lot of methodologies that could be bring together this platform of collaboration. And together in a safe place, which is higher education, we can start tackling global challenges together with the students, and with these four components: society, research, innovation, and knowledge. So I'm really thrilled to this. I really hope that these two networks can combine efforts, and that from the inside we are able to also identify the key knowledge and learnings so that we could work together. And communities of ELISA really are a great example of this. We have, for example, communities that are starting and how to help cities and the decarbonization and neutrality working neighborhood by neighborhood. So how can we go out from the higher education space to the cities and work with the citizens? This is an example of a community. How can we build and think activities with students and society to bring new learning experiences to the path? So this is really important. So thank you, Maria, for bringing us here. It was really eye-opening for me, this conference. I learned a lot, and I'm also an engineer. And my training was a bit after, just a bit after Alberto, but I was just trained with hard skills. I don't want to talk about soft, but just knowledge layers, a piling up of knowledge layers. And we know that this we have talked for 2 days of global challenges. This is not enough. The timings of even of the solutions for an engineer is not enough, because it's really rapid, really quick. So the engineer now has to have a lot of other competences to be able to accompany the development of new solutions. So I really think this bounding between STEM and humanities, social sciences is important. Of course, engineering is an important focus for ELISA, but not just. We also want to identify which bridges we want to build from social sciences to STEM, but the other way around too. So this dialogue, this conversation, this learning that we have to do together, we are starting to do it in ELISA. So really looking forward to this. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Alberto, Sofia. This is incredibly stimulating. I think we're all like fired up. Before we go to the rest of the colleagues, I have a question and a comment, and reflecting on my own training. So I'm a biologist by training, and I remember, I mean, it makes me feel really old because at the time, so I studied at University of Barcelona, we still had was it before the Bologna process, right? We had 5-year degrees that were so incredibly comprehensive, and I remember studying philosophy and natural philosophy and history of science and understanding where all of this comes from. Today, we only get 2-3-year max the degree in genomics directly. So when I moved to Australia for my PhD, the undergrads that I was teaching, they had a degree in genomics or in microbiology. They didn't have a full understanding of a full biological system because they only went into one narrow path already from the first moment at the university. So that's my comment. The question is, what other models in the world have you looked at to inspire the ELISA project? Because I spent 7 years in the US, and with Claire, we were talking about yesterday, in the US, this framework is already quite advanced in terms of there's humanitarian engineering, sustainable engineering, all of those frameworks are already well established. However, what I found really interesting is that what they do is they send groups of students from Stanford to Kenya for a water project. And so the connotations of that still very kind of colonialist. And so I wanted to get your perspectives on who is doing this around the world. How are they doing it? Is it this US kind of US, Africa, US goes to Latin America, kind of global South to fix things for them? Is this still the framework, or is it evolving? And then the last comment I will make is that this is really important for a higher level, I think, technology governance, because of course engineering has a lot of branches, but one of them is software engineering, and software engineers, the Elon Musk of the world, the Zuckerbergs of the world, are now single-handedly driving the future in a way that is going to be very difficult for diplomacy. It's already very difficult for diplomacy and governance to catch up, because basically this technology and deep tech is already now in the hands of the private sector. So the technology governance is really changing the game for diplomacy. So I wanted to get that kind of the ethical tech movement, which comes from the engineers that are doing the software engineering, and they're going to be shaping this world. So those are the comments, questions for you, and then we open to the other.
Thank you, Margot. Certainly, there are interesting questions. First of all, you asked about other models, other approaches, and the fact is, all engineering schools are coming to the same conclusions. And although there are some variations in the approaches, you find very much common terrain in the way the best schools are moving on, MIT, Zurich, Lausanne, but I would say all universities that are really the most renowned universities of engineering technology are coming to the same conclusion. I think they came to the same conclusion several years ago. And all the papers that have been published by the European Universities Associations, even in the area of technology like CESAR, there are many of them. All of them, they come to the same conclusions. Our engineers require special training in order to overcome the problems that the engineering solutions are finding in many areas in the world. Let's look at the area of civil engineering. You mentioned the idea of a water project. I'm specialized in water, and I've done a lot of work in projects in water research and advice. And I found myself, and I've worked, I'm not blameless in this. Offering a government a solution that is technical. And then when you deal with a project, you find that the same problem has been approached several times before you with technical solutions that have never been implemented. So one consultancy after the other, looking at the same type of problem with the same approach, and very rarely you see that the proposed solution, the agreed solution, has been really discussed, shared by those that will be affected by the solution. And certainly this is a problem because engineers think that the only solution is a technical one. And of course, we need the technical solutions. This is beyond question. But the type of technical solution, the way it is defined, the way it is implemented requires a lot of negotiation, a lot of understanding of the social and actual circumstances in which you will be working on. So many institutions came to the same conclusions. And yet, implementing the new approach of engineering, that's challenging. That's very challenging because students have a limited amount of time, a limited amount of energy. And we want our students to be excellent engineers in all areas. So how much time do we have to train, to expose them in the other areas? How do we do that? That's not easy. That's one of the problems that ELISA will address. And finding the way to do it is not trivial. It isn't trivial because training an engineer is hard. It takes a lot of time, students' attention, students' energies. So how do we do that? This is what ELISA will address. Okay. Now, turning to the second question, software engineering, and I don't want to take much time because you certainly want more comments, more interventions. I think in Europe right now, all the development of software engineering are intended to be sovereign software engineering. And that I will leave that to that. So something that is really focused on Europe and what the values that we have.
Thank you. Okay.
Training the next generation of engineers is not a challenge only because the students don't have time to do such the training. I think the major problem, and I speak of experience working at the Polytechnic for 15 years, is that the old generation of academics and the professors are not ready to teach the next generation of engineers. They are not trained, but the most important thing is that they are not open-minded. So I was surprised to hear what you said before. I was nicely surprised that there are engineers that think all these things that you presented to us. The group of people that I used to hang with and being at the same meetings and Senate meetings didn't think of this way. So this is an eye-opening meeting for us as well, that the other part of the world is moving ahead and is thinking differently. So thanks a lot.
It is really a challenge, Maria. So that's why one of the aims, this is not just a project, it's a change management alliance, how to learn together. It's really important. So we have to build a certain kind of mindsets that I don't work with this discipline. I never been seated in the table with that discipline. So this is a big challenge. So it's really important to be together in this question.
Thank you so much. Okay, we have about 20 minutes for discussion, but first we want to hear from the insiders. We have Simone back there. Rasmus. Yep.
Time, not too much, but some time for the students that made all this long way to come here and join us. Thank you.
Thanks for this very interesting presentation. I would like to come back to this point of like educating people coming from the engineering or maybe hard sciences about social science concepts. Because from my experience, I'm a PhD student at Leiden University, and I'm based at the Computer Science Institute. So all of my colleagues are hard scientists, and I find it quite frustrating sometimes to explain what I do and to interest them in my research. So I also find it quite interesting that you say that the engineers you are teaching are quite open-minded, and I would like to know, what are the lessons learned? Like, what strategies do you use? Are they just self-motivated, or have you learned specific ways to engage them with social science concept theories? That would be quite interesting. And then another question I had was, I mean, we've seen science diplomacy often is presented as something that's, yeah, quite positive and maybe not so challenging, but I could imagine that coordinating this big network is actually quite challenging. I would like to know, like, what challenges do you experience in your everyday work, and how do you tackle these challenges? Thank you.
In terms of learned experience, we are really young. We have 1 year, so we are collecting this all feedbacks that the courses that we have been sharing and developing. So in 2 years, I will have much more learned stories to share with you. In terms of the challenges, there are many challenges, and one of the challenges is, yeah, we are here, we are presenting you this open-minded vision and our ambition, but the challenge is, how do we go to operational? How do we put this into concrete offers of the Alliance? What kind of courses, what we want to design, what kind of modularity we have to put in the ELISA common degree, what kind of offers do we build? How can we create incentives for the academics to come and also for the students to come? So we're dealing with this every day. We also have a structure of work packages that are dealing with this among the Alliance. But most of it, the challenge is, we have to bring everyone really slowly together with us. So trying to build a common view of what do we want to do together and how can we do together. And it's really challenging at this moment. We are dealing with this question of what is the model of the engineer of the future? What do we put inside? What as ELISA we stand for, and how do we concretize that? It's actual ongoing work.
Answering to your question about how to motivate the students to, how to create this need of going beyond their training, my answer is very clear. When we bring to the university employers from the industry, from the government, from the NGOs, from the foundations, they always tell the students that they have to get that kind of training, that they have to have an exposure to this kind of experience in order to have a successful career. So it's not the university convincing them that they have to do it, because we don't have much credit on that, because we already require a lot of effort from them. But when they get the message from the job market and from the environment beyond the university, this is very powerful.
Thank you very much. So we have Rasmus, Simone, Thierry, and Nina. Rasmus first.
Shall I go ahead? Good. Thank you very much for these very interesting reflections, and an immediate thought, that's basically the importance of understanding other disciplines and understanding their questions and methods. Yesterday, in one of the panels, there was a discussion about what explains international conflict. And that's, how to say, that's not black magic. I mean, that's basically what international relations and political science is about. Why do states go to war with each other? So there, I think a clearer understanding of what do different fields work with, what are their questions, what are their methods, and then understanding, basically knowing your own limits. Okay, what is this a question of? Is this my discipline, or who else can answer this question? And there, I think that I think that we should do this interdisciplinary thing from the very start. I think in European higher education, there's a very unfortunate tradition that people finish gymnasium or liceo, and then they go straight into a pure discipline. And then you mess people up for 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years, and then you have to start, how to say, fixing their head. Instead of where I think, I don't have any educational experience from the United States, but I have the impression the American liberal arts model, where you start out much broader and then specialize gradually. I think that's a very interesting model. So I would encourage, how to say, starting out very broad and then specializing slowly, but that's very much against European tradition. Then there was one thing I wanted to bring up, and that's, how to say, equality, equal access in a social sense. Because I think many of the things we're talking about, you could also, in sociology, you could describe that as social capital, cultural capital. And what kinds of networks do you have? What kind of education culture do you have from your family setting, etc.? And there, of course, the higher up you are in society, the stronger social, cultural, educational, etc. capital you have. And I just want to mention one experience. So I had the opportunity to do my PhD in international relations in Cambridge, UK. And there I learned the importance of informal learning. And of course, if you come from a privileged background in terms of social capital, cultural capital, educational capital, you have a lot of informal learning. And if you are in institutions with a lot of resources, you do a lot of informal learning. So what I saw in Cambridge is that you take these 18, 20, 21-year-old British undergraduates, and if they turn up for formal hall in their college, they can basically dine with corporate executives, high-ranking military officers, cabinet ministers, top scientists. And that is an informal learning that is extremely valuable. But that is, of course, an informal learning that is very, very unequally distributed across society. And by far most European universities, they neither have the material resources nor the mindset to provide something like that. And you mentioned Stanford students going to Kenya, for example. I'll just finish on the point that if you look at Ivy League schools, if you look at the fees of Ivy League schools, and if you take that as the per student budget, then an American Ivy League school will have 8 times the resources of a Scandinavian university in social sciences and humanities, and 4 times the resources in STEM subjects. And that's also a realization that we have to have in Europe. Of course, I'm very, very adamant to have like publicly funded open public education. But basically in Europe, we have to realize what this kind of education costs, and that you get what you pay for. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Rasmus. Let's go to Alexandros first before the general comments, because he was also in the roster.
Okay, so thank you very much.
Sorry to miss you.
Thank you for being invited here. I'll start with a few biographical comments, and I hope that you will understand that the purpose of it was not just a kind of narcissism, but it has a meaning in this context. I'm a sociologist, but I have begun my studies as a mathematician at the ETH, at the Technical University in Zurich. But before that, I passed the examination for electrical engineering. And when I discovered I would be much more interested in philosophy and social sciences, then I thought mathematics is a way to go into that, but I abandoned mathematics and I went into sociology. So because I passed my examination for engineering, I had to work for 3 months in Braun Boveri in Baden as an engineer without knowledge. We have to pass through all the departments. And then we had a very good impression of how a factory works and what the work of engineers in a factory was. And that was, for me, really a formative experience, which was very important for me later when I turned into sociology of technology, because my work is the intersection between sociology of technology, economic sociology, and political sociology in many senses. So after many years, I was back at the ETH in Zurich as a guest professor and academic visitor working on projects which had to do with financial technologies. And there, when I was there, I was organizing a meeting in Oslo with other colleagues on technological risks. So I went to the colleagues at the ETH to speak with them who would participate in such a conference. There were colleagues working on technological risk. They were doing risk models, mostly mathematical risk models. And they told me, well, that's a very good idea, but we don't want to be involved in this, because if we create an example to our students that we're dealing with this kind of real life risk management, this has to do with too many case studies and soft skills, and people cannot make their records and become academics. They cannot get the citations if they don't do closed mathematical models, closed risk models. So I couldn't get them to that. So I went to industry, and I've got many interesting people, chief engineers from industry who have been very well trained in the same schools, but they had this experience which they brought there, and then we had a real, very interesting discussion about real life engineering risk management. So in this sense, I think if we go take this line, Alberto's introduction talk was a real introduction into science and technology diplomacy. In my view, in most cases, we have to do with technology diplomacy, not with science diplomacy. We do have also science diplomacy, but in most cases, we have technology diplomacy. So now a brief story about a book. There is a wonderful book by Donald Mackenzie, which is called Inventing Accuracy. Please read it if you have time. It's about how politicians and diplomats perceived the way gyroscopes work, because intercontinental missiles were guided by gyroscopes, and the negotiations, which were very much influenced by the way people were understanding how gyroscopes work, because the level of accuracy defined also the level of scrapping missiles. If you had missiles which didn't have enough accuracy, then we could leave them on your arsenal. If they had the high accuracy, then they had to be scrapped. So the negotiations was about that between the Americans and the Soviets. And they were very much influenced about the way people were understanding those technologies. And there, I think we come to science or technology diplomacy. It has very much to do with how negotiators understand the object of negotiation. But understanding the object of negotiation is only one part, because there you have, and Maria has very interesting ideas on that, we have really coevolution of politics and technology and science in the way those mindscapes are shaped in the context of which people can really do this kind of negotiation. So understanding technology and science, which mostly has to do with the normative orientation, with optimality in a sense, and understanding politics, which is always suboptimal, has to do with suboptimal solutions and dilemmas, which can be it's very difficult to resolve in many situations. This interface, this interplay is very interesting to understand in order to understand the object of science and technology diplomacy. So it's very difficult to do that, I think, in most cases. And that's why I believe, among many others here, in the value of case studies, because in the case studies, you don't only understand what the whole thing is about, but you can very quickly understand what you don't know and how you can get this knowledge. And in most cases, in those settings, knowledge comes from interaction between experts and not experts. The ones who are the reflective practitioners in those cases, they have to exploit the knowledge of the expert, how it works. So in training, if we want to have an academic training, and I'm concentrated on that in science and technology diplomacy, case studies are very important. But the next step could be, after case studies which create the sensitivity on the subject, have a reference to disciplines which have dealt with that, like political science, diplomatic history, or think about the state, or think about how people behave in networks in those situations, and perhaps also think about how international law or contracting is the end, comes at the end of the game, and then have case studies, and then again case studies explained on the basis of the heuristic you create on the basis of impressions of disciplinary aspects. Of course, final remark, this is not the whole story, because much of science diplomacy...
I'm sorry, we're running out of time, so if you can please finish.
Yeah, I would have finished. Much of science diplomacy is not about contracting and law. It's very much about relationship management, creating the psychological or social psychological conditions on having contacts and discussions afterward, which can be very important. So that was my not very brief comment, but
Thank you.
my comment.
That's fine. Thank you very much. All right, so very briefly, please, Simone, Thierry, Nina, and then you.
I would just take issue with the fact that the hard scientists are insensitive to values and society questions. I can remember from my student time infinite discussions on the values of communism and etc. And that went on throughout all my career with most of my colleagues. But my point is, in your presentation, you speak about the values of engineering and of solutions and of the like, which I think is excellent and perfectly to the point. But you end up with a sentence which says, and to use those for the good or whatever. And I think I would stop short of that, because in the end, nobody knows what's the good. So I think people should understand the power and indeed the values, but I think the judgmental element to that should really be left out.
Thank you, Thierry. We're going to collect the comments and then come back to you as a summary. Is Simone still interested in saying something? No? Okay, so then we have Nina. You still interested? And then here and then here.
Thank you. I'm still interested. I'm totally super interested. My name is Nina Worms. I come from KTH Royal Institute of Technology, where I also have an engineering degree as a background. And I'm really thrilled by hearing about ELISA. My university belonged to the Unite network. But so my experience is not that the challenge is the students, but the challenge is the faculty, and that has to do with the economic functions and structures of the university. So there is partly an epistemic, even though there might be values, but I mean, to teach STS and history, you need to actually know that. That's not just something that anyone can do. And the economic side. So in our experience, actually, when history and STS has come into engineering programs in any functional way, it has been when we create new programs, because then it doesn't threaten any other position of any other one. So your view on that would be really interesting, but that's in short.
Thank you very much, Nina. Yeah, we have 2 short comments and then back to the panel.
Thank you. Within the course, Professor Maurizio Bona from CERN has mentioned the song by Sting, Englishman in New York, who is complaining about the difficulty of breed in American society. And it was mentioned in the context of intercultural difficulties. Well, I'm a Russian citizen, currently working in France, representing here in Germany an Italian institution where I'm doing my PhD in biology. I think Sting is exaggerating. And what I wanted to say is that I'm deeply grateful that I did not feel an alien as Sting did in New York, neither on the course nor on this offline event. So thank you. And the short end of my speech, I don't think there are any non-enthusiastic people about this initiative currently right now in the room, but I think it might be very useful to track the alumni of your of these initiatives of summer schools and courses in 6 months, in 1 year, in 3 years, to track how influential this initiative was on careers of these students, especially of STEM students who are not biased by social background. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Last comment.
Thank you so much. My name is Nil Uzun, and I'm a PhD candidate and lecturer in sociology at Rutgers University, New Jersey. But no, I didn't come from New Jersey. I've been living in Germany, and I have been a participant of the science diplomacy seminar. And my comment is not going to be that short because I think we heard quite a lot of professors, and I think it's important to hear the students and participants as well. So sorry for being a little bit over time. So I research technology, races, and computing speed from a global sociology perspective. So I come from that academic theoretical field, and I came across the course because I was trying to conceptualize technology races from a global sociology perspective. So I was looking into science diplomacy debates for that kind of conceptual tools. And first of all, how I benefited from the course and this event is to hear the practical experiences of different actors who are not just my informants in computer scientists, but also different actors in biotechnology, administrators, different kind of politicians and representatives. But getting back to my initial concern about the conceptual framework, I still feel a little bit limited, I have to say. For example, there were utterances about colonialism, decolonization, and I was just wondering, do we understand globe or global relations in the same way, or are we just using these keywords just to be done with certain criticisms, or are we all aware of colonial histories, contemporary implications of these histories? Also, another example that we have been talking about, hierarchies, asymmetries, inequalities. So once again, are we just mentioning them so that to signal that we are aware of them, but are there any spaces in science diplomacy debates to actually critically reflect on these hierarchies? So for example, we have been talking about the world, human and science and data and health, but are we all aware of the loadedness of these terms, especially when we talk about European values, for example? Are we all aware of the implications of these dominant discussions in science diplomacy circles? And we don't have to be all in the same page about colonialism, or that I think that's an ideological question that can be answered somewhere else, necessary, but I think we can debate that somewhere else. But I think I find it really important to transpose all these practical experiences to cutting edge scholarly work in social sciences, not only to have a rich theoretical agreement on science diplomacy, but I think it's also important for the practitioners to sharpen their edge about their understanding of these critical concepts and the uses of these concepts and what it means and the implications and the politics of these concepts that brings us to the whole politics of knowledge, I believe. So I think that's my take on from the whole science diplomacy debates, and it wasn't that long. Thank you.
It was wonderful. Thank you so much for this deep reflections. Now we turn it back to the panel for final comments. Who wants to go? Yeah, Maria goes last.
I would say thank you so much for the inputs. Everything's being stored in my head because it's really important. I'm still having more questions than answers. I'm sorry, but I think it's a good question. It's a good point. So I don't have much comments besides to thank you for this community to hosting us.
For me, this 30 minutes discussion was really what makes the effort of coming here really well worth. And I thank you very much because all of the ideas that were mentioned, all the comments that were made are really useful in order to identify what's relevant, what should be the priorities, what should we put the attention on. But let me make one comment. The European Alliances Initiative of Europe wants to make sure that all the students in Europe that want to have a mobility experience, that want to have an European degree, should be able to do it no matter what their background is. So I'm addressing a question that you mentioned, and the idea of inclusiveness, the idea of not letting anyone behind this opportunity. And this has a lot of meaning. It's not a question of logistics, not only a question of logistics, not only questions of money. It's a question of attitude to make sure that that's relevant. And if we do that, for me, that's a tremendous accomplishment of the European Universities Initiative. And we will work on that to make sure that that's an opportunity for everyone. But all the comments that were made are really useful. And I thank you very much for all that.
Thank you very much both for being with us. And now turn it to Maria for the closing of this part, and then to Pascal for closing of the whole. Oh, okay. I understood. Okay. Okay, great.
So I'll start with the very last comment from Neil. We are not on the same page. And this is the good thing, that we are not on the same page, because we need to work, all of us together, in order to get on this same page, which is a question of how the same page is going to look like. So this is why we need diversity, interculturality. This is why we need this kind of science diplomacy, but not only science diplomacy. Pascal talked about innovation technology yesterday, right? We speak about tech diplomacy. The UPM initiative to have a community, an ELISA community on tech diplomacy with us from the FAU is also another attempt. To close up, I think InsSciDE for me has been a perfect experience, especially now, these last days, because it speeded up an idea that I have been working on and have in my mind for some years now, to have an executive program on science diplomacy. And these 3 last days, there have been many discussions with our partners, our ELISA partners, and it seems that we're heading in this direction. And maybe it's too early to advertise it, but it seems very possible that next spring we will be able to offer the first science diplomacy certificate in collaboration with the ELISA. We start from the FAU. We want to include insiders, as we did with the experimental course that we have been talking about all this time. And in a way, I'll go back to Neil's comment when we discussed during the course, and I asked them to evaluate the course. And I said, be very harsh with us, because this is going to help us become better. She says, if you offer this again, we'll take it. And so I think this is what we plan to do, to offer it again, and hope that all of you are going to give us your insights and help us move forward in this direction. And I know that Marga has already been talking with ELISA of how you can bring all of your very valuable experience to ELISA, to the ELISA network. So many thanks for this session today. when Pascal then finishes up, I have two practical announcements that concern us here. Pascal, should I bring you the, or do you want to, maybe you want to come?
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure what I'm concluding or not. So I will try to make some comment about what was exchanged this morning, and in fact, it's a good conclusion for the 2 days event. Firstly, that I confirm what I said before, that the two Warsaw Summer School are a big asset in the result of our project. And then I think that we have to think in the future that we will have to enrich it, use it, and cooperate with EAD and with the team and with the network of alumni. You mentioned the alumni, it's very important. And finally, it's a little bit sad to say that, but that, or not, that the pandemic gave us put a big challenge in front of us. I was not sure that I would have been able to go beyond, but the team was able to do that online. And finally, this evolution was a kind of positive evolution. They created something that I could not imagine, and it's amazing. I think really 100% frankly and positively. So that's a point. The other point is about the big debate we had about ELISA. I'm not in a position to make comments specifically on this project. I'm in another university, in another network. Well, it's not my job here. I just want to come back to the engineers. And I interviewed a lot of engineers in my career dealing with history. And I know they are not this model of people who have technology and they use it strictly. No, they have a culture. They have their own culture. Some are Christian, some are communists, some are atheists, and so on. I think that we constructed because of the criticism we had to build against technocracy and so on, a picture of the engineer in the past that does not exist. And history could easily show you that engineers who are engaged in the society, were taking ideas in the society, they didn't need what they have to learn in their school. In their school, they learn things, but they were able to read, to learn everywhere. And I think that this attitude is even more a reality in younger students. They are able to have information in so different places that, well, the articulation between their culture, their place in the society, and their ability to deal with technical issues or economical issues and so on is not always a necessity strictly in their school in a formal way, I will say. I think that more and more our university or school have to be open to society. I'm not sure that an integrated product giving to the future engineers, you will have everything. Like, you know, in the old time when you go to the university restaurant, you had a big plate of metal with different holes from the beginning to the dessert. I think that they prefer to pick up things in different ways. So well, that's my personal point of view, and we will see that in the future. In the future, I'm very optimistically listening to what we shared during these 2 days. We have some months together in InsSciDE, then in the Alliance, and with this sometimes complex network of relationship in our group, we will go beyond and we will make a very, very nice things. Last point, it's about biology and medicine. I see how the students now are learning medicine, and they have course of ethics. And I'm not sure they are aware that it's very important. And maybe what I'm saying is shocking. I don't know, but they're engaged in so challenging things and they are under pressure. Go in an amphitheater and see how the course of ethic is. It's not always easy. Some years ago, I teach history of telecommunication in a school of engineers, high-level school of engineers in Paris. They were polite, but they were not completely convinced that they were learning something important. And it's my final point, my experiment in the university. I'm still surprised everywhere I teach how the students are stressed by the mark. I've not a very hard relationship with my students in master. I try to have them happy and creative and so on. But when there is a mark, it's stressing. And if you want students, it's what I will say, it's my last point, it's terrible. Learn something, you have to give them a mark, and to have the mark at a high level in their evaluation. It's a little bit sad, but that's true at present time, but the future will be better. Thank you very much.
Before we go, I guess it's Claire, unless you, Claire, want to close the open session. Yes, then this is your job. You are the moderator.
I think I feel I closed already many times and thank many times everyone on the panel and everybody, especially for your contributions and especially the students. So thank you very much. And also our online student witnesses. And I think we have a lot of food for thought and for the future, not just for insight, but also for the partnership with Eliza and what's going to emerge next. So thank you very much all. And now we close the public portion and we go into logistics business. Thank you very much. Yes, big applause.